The morning of August 24, 1944, dawned over the rolling fields of Normandy with a deceptive calm. Mist clung to the hedgerows, curling like smoke over the scarred landscape. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth, gun oil, and cordite, a harbinger of the violence yet to erupt. From the crest of a hill, the gleaming armor of Germany's most formidable armored force reflected the weak sunlight, their silhouettes lined like statues of impending dominance. These were the men and machines that had terrorized Europe for 4 years, the elite Panzer divisions, a symbol of precision, discipline, and deadly engineering. Yet, beneath this veneer of invincibility, there was a tension that even the most hardened commanders could not deny. Rumors of overstretched supply lines, exhausted crews, and the relentless advance of Allied forces had begun to gnaw at the confidence of the Wehrmacht. The world believed these were invulnerable warriors of steel and cunning, but in the coming hours, that certainty would dissolve in ways no one could have anticipated. This is a story of contradiction, of machines built for domination, yet crippled by logistics, of soldiers trained for precision, yet overwhelmed by chaos, of arrogance confronted with the unyielding unpredictability of war. It is a story not just of tanks and bullets, but of human endurance, error, and the fragile illusion of invincibility. The stage for this nightmare was the Normandy bocage, a labyrinth of narrow roads, sunken lanes, and dense hedgerows that had already frustrated the German command since the D-Day landings in June 1944. Here, geography became as lethal as artillery. The panzers, designed for open-field blitzkrieg, were forced into a terrain that neutralized their speed and firepower. The Allies, aware of the vulnerabilities of these mechanized giants, orchestrated a campaign of attrition, airstrikes, and relentless maneuver warfare that would test the limits of German coordination. The panzer divisions themselves were a blend of history and engineering marvel. Men who had survived the campaigns in France, Russia, and North Africa, now found themselves under new pressures. Panzer IVs, Panthers, and Tiger IIs rumbled in column formations, their engines growling like beasts restrained, their armor plates thick, yet not impervious. Commanders such as General Heinrich Eberbach and Colonel Michael Wittmann faced impossible decisions: advance, retreat, or hold, and each choice carried the weight of hundreds of lives and the fate of a once mighty division. Opposing them were the Allies, an intricate coalition of American, British, and Canadian forces, each bringing technological innovations and doctrinal ingenuity. Air supremacy, combined arms coordination, and logistical mastery, the Red Ball Express supply lines, the precise use of Sherman tanks, and the relentless artillery barrages, gave the Allies an invisible hand guiding the chaos. To the Germans, it was a world where every misstep could be catastrophic, where the best tank crews in Europe could be rendered helpless by weather, terrain, and the unseen network of supply convoys and intelligence. In those first hours of the 96-hour nightmare, the contradiction was stark. The panzer divisions, the pride of the Wehrmacht, were advancing into what seemed like controlled territory. Yet every road was a trap, every hedgerow a potential ambush. Allied radio chatter intercepted by German signals officers hinted at encirclement, reconnaissance pilots reported columns stalled, exposed, and vulnerable. The battlefield, which should have amplified the panzer's strength, instead magnified their weaknesses. And yet, in this tension lay a profound truth: war is not merely a contest of metal and firepower, but of adaptation, ingenuity, and resilience. The panzer crews, drilled in years of tactical mastery, confronted a reality that their training could not fully encompass. For every Tiger I advancing down a lane, there was a hidden Sherman ready to strike, for every artillery salvo fired, an Allied maneuver threatening their flank. In these moments, the elite became ordinary, the unstoppable became vulnerable. It is here that the story takes on its human dimension. Letters from soldiers describe the smell of fuel and gunpowder that clung to their uniforms, the fear that tightened the chest, the exhaustion from endless hours behind the wheel. Officers scribbled frantic notes as reports poured in, detailing lost vehicles, destroyed fuel trucks, and gaps in communication lines. And in the skies, the droning hum of Allied aircraft was a constant reminder: the war had become as much about endurance and will as it was about tactics and steel. By the afternoon of that first day, the veneer of invincibility had begun to crack. The panzer columns moved slower than anticipated, bogged down in mud and confusion. Fuel shortages forced commanders to make impossible choices: abandon vehicles, consolidate units, or risk advancing with incomplete strength. And every decision rippled through the ranks, amplifying the tension, fear, and uncertainty. This is more than a military tale. It is a lens through which we examine the fragility of human ambition, the limits of technology, and the unpredictability of conflict. The 96-hour nightmare would not only destroy a division, it would shatter confidence, challenge assumptions, and redefine what it meant to wage war in the modern age. By the end of those 4 days, the Panzer Division that had once embodied German military supremacy would lie in ruins, not through a single decisive battle, but through a relentless convergence of logistical failure, tactical ingenuity, human courage, and unforeseen circumstance. And in that destruction, there emerged a story of adaptation, resilience, and the profound truths of human nature, that no amount of training or technology can fully anticipate the chaos of reality, and that even the most formidable warriors are vulnerable when the very foundations of strategy and survival are undermined. The world would remember this episode as a brief, catastrophic unraveling, a nightmare compressed into 96 hours. But the lessons it offered would endure far beyond the hedgerows of Normandy, a cautionary tale of hubris and humility, of machine and man, and of the fragile line between dominance and devastation. The story of Germany's elite Panzer Division in those fateful 4 days is a story of human ambition colliding with the inexorable logic of circumstance. It is a story of fire and steel, courage and fear, precision and chaos. And above all, it is a reminder that in war, as in life, the greatest illusions of power can vanish in a single heartbeat. On August 23, 1944, the Panzer Division sat like a coiled spring along the edges of the Normandy countryside. The men were weary but confident. They had survived years of campaigns, France, Russia, North Africa, and had learned to trust the lethal machinery at their disposal. Columns of Tiger IIs, Panthers, and Panzer IVs lined the narrow roads, their polished armor glinting faintly in the morning sun. Engines rumbled like restrained beasts, ready to leap into the chaos of battle. Yet beneath this show of power, cracks had begun to appear. Supplies were inconsistent. Fuel shortages plagued the columns. Communication lines were stretched to breaking. The German High Command, still recovering from the shock of the Allied breakout from Normandy's beaches, underestimated the speed and coordination of Allied operations. For all their tactical skill, the panzers were entering terrain unsuited to their design, hedgerows and sunken lanes that robbed tanks of speed and reduced their tactical advantage. Commanders such as General Heinrich Eberbach, who had orchestrated previous armored offensives, now faced the dual challenges of morale and logistics. Officers scribbled frantic memos and sent radio dispatches across the lines, fuel shortages critical. Recon reports indicate Allied movement near Mortain. Request reinforcements. Yet reinforcements were days away, scattered across the patchwork of retreating German forces. The division's elite crews felt the weight of responsibility: every vehicle lost, every delay, every misstep could be fatal. The Allied forces, conversely, had spent months preparing. American and British units coordinated air, land, and intelligence assets with meticulous precision. Sherman tanks and artillery regiments moved along supply lines carefully maintained by the Red Ball Express, their routes timed to the hour, bringing fuel, ammunition, and food directly to the front. From above, reconnaissance aircraft painted a living map of German positions. Every hesitation, every misalignment among the German panzers was noted and recorded for exploitation. Despite the looming threat, the German troops pressed forward. Pride in training gave them confidence, yet the anxiety in the ranks was palpable. Soldiers whispered in hushed tones about the relentless Allied air patrols overhead, the uncertainty of the roads ahead, and the vulnerability of their armored columns to ambush. Here lay the tension of the era, a machine perfected for domination meeting the unpredictable reality of modern, combined arms warfare. The nightmare began in earnest on August 24, 1944, when Allied forces executed Operation Cobra's follow-up maneuvers. Intelligence had revealed weak points in the German lines. The Americans had innovated a technique of rolling barrages, combining artillery and close air support with mechanized advances to cut off enemy formations. For the German panzers, the consequences were immediate. Units advancing along the Route Nationale 158 found themselves bottlenecked, tanks lining up in narrow lanes while Allied fighter bombers swooped down with devastating precision. A Patton-led armored brigade unleashed concentrated fire on stalled columns. Fuel shortages compounded the crisis. Panthers and Tigers abandoned along the road became immobile iron targets, their crews forced to fight or flee on foot. Technical limitations, previously thought negligible, became fatal flaws. Tiger II heavy tanks, with their thick armor, were designed to dominate open battlefields, but the soft, mud-slicked hedgerows slowed them to a crawl. Panthers, engineered for speed and maneuverability, struggled in tight lanes, and Panzer IVs, though versatile, lacked the firepower to respond effectively to simultaneous air and ground assault. On the morning of the second day, Colonel Michael Whitman, legendary tank ace and tactical genius, realized the futility of traditional frontal engagements. His units attempted flanking maneuvers, coordinating with limited infantry support, but Allied artillery and air cover anticipated every move. Whitman's diary noted, "Our tanks are becoming tombs on wheels. Every advance is met with steel and fire from unseen positions. The men are exhausted, but retreat is impossible." Amid the chaos, Allied logistical ingenuity proved decisive. The Red Ball Express, with thousands of trucks carrying fuel and munitions, ensured that forward positions remained operational. Radar-guided artillery and continuous air reconnaissance created a network of deadly traps for German armor. Every tactical advantage the Panzer Division possessed was neutralized, not by superior technology in the traditional sense, but by the integration of logistics, intelligence, and coordination. The confrontation reached its apex on August 25 and 26. German commanders attempted desperate counterattacks, aiming to retake key positions near Avranches and Mortain. Each attempt was met with overwhelming resistance. Allied artillery barrages shredded advancing columns, while airstrikes disrupted fuel and ammunition supply lines. Tanks that had previously symbolized German supremacy now became isolated death traps. Eyewitness accounts describe the battlefield in terrifying detail, the roar of engines mixing with the shriek of bombers overhead, the smell of burning fuel and scorched earth filling the air, soldiers leaping from immobilized vehicles as shells tore through armor. A German radio operator recalled, "We were moving, yet never advancing. Everywhere there was fire, dust, and the cries of the wounded. We could see the sky, but the ground was a labyrinth of death." On the Allied side, dispatches noted the unprecedented success of coordinated strikes. Brigadier General J. Lawton Collins wrote in his report, "The enemy armored columns were caught in a vice. Our coordination with air and artillery made them ineffective. The battlefield is ours, but at the cost of vigilance. We cannot underestimate their resolve." The elite status of the Panzer Division was tested beyond measure. Commanders realized that conventional doctrines of armored warfare, shock, speed, and decisive breakthroughs, were no longer sufficient. Terrain, logistics, and integrated Allied firepower had combined to render their most sophisticated tanks vulnerable, and human endurance became the decisive factor. Human element, fear, courage, and desperation. Amid the chaos, the human dimension of this nightmare became evident. Letters from soldiers, scribbled in the mud of roadside trenches, revealed the psychological strain. One Panzer crewman wrote, "The tanks that once made us proud are now our prisons. We move forward, but the world closes in. I fear not the enemy, but the trap of our own making." Others recall the camaraderie and fleeting moments of courage. A radio operator described sharing water with a wounded comrade while the roar of Allied artillery shredded the landscape. "We joked, we cursed, we cried. And yet, somehow, we survived another hour." Even officers, trained in years of tactical theory, faced moral and emotional dilemmas. Every order to advance or hold meant potential death for hundreds. Commanders struggled to maintain cohesion, yet the fog of war made certainty impossible. The human element, fear. Pride, fatigue, and instinct, intersected with mechanical and tactical forces to create a battlefield as unpredictable as it was lethal. Consequences, devastation quantified. By August 27, 1944, the full impact was clear. In just 96 hours. Casualties, estimates suggest over 2,000 killed, wounded, or captured within the division, equipment loss, nearly 150 tanks destroyed or abandoned, including multiple Tiger IIs and Panthers, territorial failure, key positions near Avranches and Mortain fell to the Allies, severing German defensive lines, psychological impact, survivors reported disbelief, exhaustion, and shattered confidence in their once invincible unit. Strategically, the German loss opened the way for the Allied breakout into Brittany and central France. The battle demonstrated the effectiveness of combined logistics, air superiority, and coordination against even elite armored forces. The psychological toll was profound. Soldiers who had once been feared across Europe now confronted their vulnerability, and commanders were forced to reconcile their pride with the stark reality of defeat. The 96-hour nightmare was more than a tactical disaster, it was a lesson in adaptability, coordination, and the limits of technological supremacy. Elite training, superior tanks, and aggressive doctrine could not compensate for stretched supply lines, unpredictable terrain, or the ingenuity of an integrated enemy. It revealed a profound truth about warfare: the real weapon is not merely steel or firepower, but organization, foresight, and the will to endure under pressure. The Panzer crews, for all their skill and courage, were overwhelmed by a combination of human ingenuity and relentless operational pressure. For the Allies, the success reaffirmed the value of logistics, intelligence, and combined arms tactics. For the Germans, it was a humbling demonstration of vulnerability, where experience and elite status could not prevent catastrophe. And for history, it became a reminder that even the most powerful machines are subordinate to the unpredictability of terrain, circumstance, and human choice. As the sun set over the shattered roads and scarred fields of Normandy on August 27, 1944, silence fell where only days before there had been the deafening roar of engines and the relentless thunder of artillery. The elite Panzer Division, once a symbol of German military supremacy, was no longer a cohesive force. Tanks lay abandoned, fuel trucks burned, and the surviving soldiers moved as shadows of the men who had advanced with confidence only days before. In the span of 96 hours, the illusion of invincibility had been stripped away, leaving a stark testament to the unforgiving calculus of war. The nightmare was not simply a story of metal destroyed or lives lost, it was a mirror reflecting the limits of human ambition and the fragile scaffolding of strategy. The Panzers had been formidable, a fusion of human skill and technological mastery. But even the most sophisticated machines are mortal in the face of coordination, innovation, and circumstance. In those 4 days, the battlefield itself became a judge of ingenuity over arrogance, endurance over pride, and adaptability over brute strength. In the weeks that followed, historians and military analysts would dissect the events with meticulous precision. 2,000 casualties, over 150 tanks lost, and the collapse of the defensive line at Mortain became stark numbers in reports and memos. But the real story, often lost in statistics, was psychological: the eroding confidence of men who had once been feared across Europe, the trauma of commanders forced to order the destruction or abandonment of their own vehicles, the sense of helplessness among crews who realized that their training and courage, while extraordinary, were not enough to alter the trajectory of events. For the Allied forces, the victory was strategic, yes, but it came with its own price. The cost of logistics, the hours of reconnaissance, and the risk of counterattacks were constant pressures. And yet, the 96-hour ordeal proved the effectiveness of integrated warfare, where intelligence, coordination, and supply chains were as lethal as bullets and shells. The success would influence doctrine in future conflicts, cementing the principle that the most sophisticated weapon is often not a tank or a gun, but the ability to synchronize resources, knowledge, and human effort against the enemy's weaknesses. The survivors of the Panzer Division carried memories that would last a lifetime. Some wrote letters home, their words trembling with exhaustion and disbelief: "We were giants, yet we fell like children in the mud. The machines we trusted became tombs. And yet, we lived." These fragments of experience remind us that war is not only measured by territory or loss, but by the endurance of the human spirit amid chaos. Courage, fear, desperation, and resilience intersected on those roads, creating moments that were as human as they were tragic. Yet the irony of this nightmare is profound. The men who had been elite, celebrated for their efficiency and tactical genius, learned humility in the face of unpredictability. Victory, in turn, carried hidden costs for the Allies. Each advance required meticulous planning, constant vigilance, and the relentless stress of leadership under uncertainty. The battlefield was a teacher, cruel and exacting, offering lessons in both the power and the peril of human ambition. In the long term, the collapse of the Panzer Division signaled more than a single tactical defeat. It marked a turning point in the broader campaign in Western Europe. The Allied breakout from Normandy accelerated, pushing German forces into retreat, severing supply lines, and dismantling the illusion of German invulnerability. For the historians who came after, the 96-hour nightmare offered a lens through which to understand not only military history but the dynamics of human civilization itself, how technological advancement, organizational skill, and human decision-making intertwine in moments of existential pressure. Reflecting on this event, one cannot ignore the moral paradox embedded within it. The elite division, feared and venerated, was undone not merely by firepower, but by a combination of foresight, innovation, and resilience on the part of their adversaries. The victors demonstrated mastery not only of weapons but of coordination, planning, and adaptability. And yet, the human cost of victory, the lives expended, the exhaustion endured, the psychological toll, remains a hidden ledger alongside the obvious triumphs. It is a reminder that war leaves no one untouched, even those on the winning side. A final image lingers in the historical record, a Tiger II, its tracks caked in mud, abandoned on a sunken lane, smoke curling from its engine, a lone figure slumped inside. The tank, once a symbol of technological dominance, stands silent against the rising sun. It is a monument to both human ingenuity and human fallibility, a frozen moment that embodies the essence of the 96-hour nightmare. It whispers the universal truth of the battlefield: even the mightiest can falter when circumstances conspire against them, and even the smallest acts of courage and ingenuity can tilt the balance of history. Ultimately, the story of this Panzer Division is a mirror of civilization itself. It demonstrates that power is temporary, that mastery over machines and men is always contingent, and that endurance, adaptability, and cooperation often determine the outcome more than brute strength. For modern life, these lessons remain vivid. In boardrooms, cities, and institutions, the delicate interplay between preparation, innovation, and human decision-making echoes the truths laid bare on those roads in Normandy. Success requires foresight, hubris can be fatal. Strength alone does not ensure survival. And so, as the final echoes of engines and gunfire faded into history, the 96-hour nightmare left a legacy that transcends battlefield metrics. It revealed the fragility and resilience of humanity, the interplay of mind and machine, and the relentless unpredictability of circumstances. It reminded the world that even the most elite, the most confident, and the most powerful are ultimately subject to forces larger than themselves, forces of ingenuity, coordination, circumstance, and sheer human will. In the end, the Panzer Division's collapse became more than a military episode, it became a story of endurance, humility, and insight. A story that reminds us that in the crucible of adversity, the true measure of strength is not only in the weapons we wield, but in our ability to adapt, persevere, and confront the unexpected with courage. As one soldier later reflected, "We were destroyed, yet in surviving, we understood the real nature of power. It lies not in fear, nor steel, nor pride, but in the will to endure and the wisdom to see beyond ourselves." Thus, the nightmare of those 4 days endures not only in history books, but in memory and in lesson. It is a chronicle of what happens when ambition collides with reality, when technology meets human limitation, and when endurance triumphs over arrogance. And as the world continues to confront new challenges, in battlefields or boardrooms, in moments of personal struggle or collective endeavor, the story remains timeless. True strength is measured not by what is feared, but by what is understood, endured, and transformed.